So we print that nice separator here 3 times, even though in the IDE we really only see it once, but theoretically we create it 3 times. Now let's say thereafter we really want to output something for every item in our battle log. Now as I explained, we can't do that with the normal loop here. And here we can reuse I because it really only exists for that loop. So not even for the entire function, but only for that loop here. So we can reuse it in another loop. That is possible. And then here we can go all the way up to the length of our battle log array, increment I, and then here we could console log battle log, and then you learned that you can dynamically access an element in an array with that square bracket notation, and then you provide the index of the element, which is 0 based. But of course here we don't hard code the index, but instead we use I as an index, because that allows us to access the ith element for every loop iteration. So for the first iteration, where I is 0, we access the element at index 0, which is the first element. Then we increase this to 1, assuming that we have a length that is greater than 1, so more than one element. So then we have I equal to 1, so we access the element at index 1, which is the second element in the array, and so on. So now if we remove that console log statement at the bottom and I just leave this here, if we now reload again, and then we maybe attack, strong attack, attack again, and show the log. Now you see the log looks different because now we're printing every element on its own. We're doing this because of that for loop where I go all the way up to the length of my battle log, and then I console log every element on its own instead of console logging the entire array as we did it before. So this is something we can do. But as you learned, there is an alternative if you want to go through all elements in an array, and that's the for off loop. There you work with a constant instead of a variable with let. You could use let, but using const is better because unlike this for loop, I will not change. Instead, you get a new constant for every loop iteration. So behind the scenes, JavaScript will create a brand new constant for every loop iteration. Not alter the previous one, but create a new one. And therefore you can use const because it will never be altered. It will just be recreated. So basically it's dumped after a loop iteration, and then for the next iteration a brand new one is created, you could say. So we're also not redeclaring an existing constant, but we're really just getting a brand new one and the old one is dumped. Technically it has something to do with the scope where this is created, but that's something we'll have a closer look at in the next course module. So for now, just keep in mind that this gets dumped after every execution and we get a new one. You can give this any name you want, just as you could use any name up there which you wanted. You don't have to use I, it's just a convention to use I. Here we could go with element or log to describe what's in the array, and we do have log entries here, so we could name this log or log entry. And then you need the off keyword, and then the name of the array which you want to go through. And this really only is available for arrays, and you can't use it on variables that hold numbers, for example. It works for strings because strings are kind of like arrays of characters. More on that later in a separate module, but it doesn't work for numbers or booleans or objects. So here we go through battle log through this array. And log entry now is a constant which, as I said, gets created for every loop iteration. So between the curly braces, we can now use that. And here again, we can output log entry, for example. And if we do that, if we output log entry like this, what happens is that if we reload this app and we attack and strong attack, we get the same output as before, unsurprisingly, because we're going through all elements in our array, get access to it in the log entry constant, which exists for the lifetime of this iteration, and then output it. So it's basically the same as we had here, but of course it's a bit shorter, and it takes advantage of this special for loop that was built specifically for going through arrays and getting access to the elements in there. Now, one important side note here. With this approach, by using the old for loop, you automatically have access to the index of every element as well, because I is just the index. With this syntax, you have access to the element, but not to the index. You don't know which index this is at. You could manually get access by defining a variable outside of the for of loop, which starts at 0 because your index starts at 0, which you then increment in every iteration. And then here, This would be your index, but you have to manage this on your own with the extra variable. The for off loop like this doesn't give you access to the index. So now here you will see if I add some entries and I log this, now we have the index being printed after every entry, but again, we have to manage this manually if we need it.